Well, hello everyone. It's hard to believe that this is our last meeting um, before our big party on May 7th. Although I think what we're going to try to do. I'm not calling for your microphone. Okay, is this better? Can you? Okay, sorry. So what we're going to try to do this year is to plan at least one outing in June. I think we're thinking about going to Princeton. This is something only professors would think is fun. We want to go visit the recap facility where all the books are, and so we're going to see whether we can get that taken care of, and also have lunch in Princeton. Cross the Hudson. We'll take the chance, and I hope that everyone's going to come on May 7th. And there's other activities that we want to try to accomplish. Please let us know. I know we have 2 more Morningside Gardens meetings, and those have been a smashing success, thanks largely to the work of Joe Shepard and our collaboration with the school. That's right. That's right. Misha Schwartz is always and Fernando Ofadili has spoken. It's just a wonderful standing room only now event for us. And we're also working on now finally getting our fellows directory up and running, so members will hear from us about populating the data there. And then once that's tagged, we really think we can take off into a speakers bureau thing. We'll need agents and everything. So, all right. Well, today is a great honor and pleasure for me to have the honor first of reintroducing our important member and wonderful speaker and creator of an incredibly important and inspiring program in Nigeria on bringing health back to the small village where he's from and expanding it. And I think many of you were at least one of his talks, and it was really. Really, inspiration is the only word I can say. So thank you, Ferdinand Ofadili, who's also a very well-known plastic surgeon, and also, most importantly, for bringing Dr. Gambari to speak to us. Dr. Gambari is a graduate of Columbia from the CEPA program with a doctorate, who's had an extraordinarily eminent career as an ambassador in various positions from his own country of Nigeria, and then as Undersecretary of the General of the United Nations under Kofi Annan, and is very active in the African Union. There's this huge number of things which I'm not going to go into, in addition to a large number of books, so we're really, in this time of so much hatred and dissension and negativity in this world, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. We have distinguished guests here, and I'd like people to go around the room and introduce yourselves so that we can know all one another. And thank you very much for coming and joining us at EPIC today.
So I'm Ruby Seni from the School of Public Health, Epidemiology.
Fran Pritchett, MESAS, that's Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies.
Lala Grimes, a retired administrator.
Joe Shepard, an emerita from Teachers College.
Allah Tobo, Global Governance Institute, Brussels.
Shala Omorege, Africa Peace Support, formerly of the UN.
Eric Heyer, retired from the Departments of Anesthesiology and Neurology, and currently in the Department of Neurological Surgery.
Carola Fodile, graduate of Barnard College, Columbia University Business School, and currently at Bergen Community College in New Jersey.
Lamin Fati, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Gambia to the United Nations.
Dirk Solomon, Special Lecturer at SEPA.
Gail Bronner from the American Language Program.
Mary Colonna from the American Language Program.
Gilberta Cintoyan Glazer, formerly from Teachers College.
Luke Cleveland, retired from medicine. Neuroscience is my area.
Ronald Appelo, retired radiologist.
Ben Tice, retired anesthesiology.
Sheila Gorman, retired from the School of Public Health.
Doug Chalmers, retired from Department of Political Science.
Jean Stellman, School of Public Health.
Stephen Mazzoni, a gynecologic surgeon and emeritus clinical professor in obstetrics and gynecology.
Misha Schwartz, Emeritus Electrical Engineering.
Fernando Fodile, plastic surgeon.
Well, Ibrahim Gambari, the guest speaker.
And I'm Diana Dumitru, I'm the administrator for EPIC.
James Teacher, I'm a student at Columbia and, working with the Federal Work Studies.
Ben Idrissa Ouedraogo, I'm with the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa at the United Nations.
Mitzat Yohannes, also from the Special Advisor on Africa.
Hussein Shah, Office of the Special Advisor on Africa from the United Nations.
I'm David Wright, Office of the Special Advisor at the United Nations.
Well, I wanted to say good morning. I think it's now afternoon. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. When I was asked to come and speak with EPIC, I was a bit nervous because I haven't spoken to this number of very distinguished people gathered in one room. But I feel encouraged because I feel at least it's taking place in Colombia, and I know a little bit about Colombia. And it's a bit of also an accident because I started, and I want to correct the chair, I started at the School of International Affairs at that time. It's now SEPA. And the school was supposed to train people who would go on to careers in foreign service, diplomats, NGOs. And after 1 year, I decided I did not want to be a diplomat, that I did not want to be an ambassador. I just wanted to be a simple academic. So I left. I went to the Department of Political Science, got my master's and PhD, and then became what I wanted to be, which is to be a professor of political science. But accidents do happen, and here I am. I've spent most of my adult life in diplomacy, in the service of my country and at the United Nations. But what a pleasure it is to speak before you all. And I want to thank in particular the chair of EPI, Jean Stellman, as well as Professor Fodile. Those of you who know Professor Fodile may not know one aspect of him. If he asks you to do something, there's no choice. You have to do it. Because it's in your best interest to do so. And I want to thank him for facilitating this meeting. And I'm glad that if you heard that the Office of Special Advisor on Africa is so heavily represented in this gathering. There are the 4 of them there. There's only a simple reason. I was the one who established the Office of Special Advisor. And so they are here to support their old mentor. And I really want to thank you all for coming out to listen to this gentleman who likes to refer to himself simply as a teacher by training and a diplomat by accident. Very prolonged accident, but still an accident. And I was thinking of what to say. I mean, what title? What should I pick? And the title of my presentation is still evolving, but I finally settled on Multilateralism, the United Nations, and the global challenges of peace and security, human rights, and development. I've also learned something at the UN, which is that if you are going to speak elsewhere, you should choose a topic that's very long, so at least the audience will find something they like. Although I must also say that in terms of power relations at the UN, the longer your title, the shorter your authority. For example, I was Special Advisor, Under Secretary General and Special Advisor to the Secretary General on African Affairs. But the person who really has authority in the UN has only one SG, Secretary General, hyphenated. And the next one is Deputy Secretary General. Although I must also let you know that in the UN, we refer to our Secretary General simply by the name SG, by the initial SG, Secretary General. But Kofi Annan, who in a short while will be 1 year since we lost him, said that the true meaning of SG means scapegoat. Because when things go right at the UN, the big powers take credit. When it goes wrong, the Secretary General is the scapegoat. But I feel that there's a reason why I've chosen this topic, because now we are in an age where there's serious attack on multilateralism, all the things we took for granted. For example, that you cannot solve problems of global nature without the countries of the world coming together in a multinational, multilateral framework to deal with it. But we are now in an age whereby it's me first, my country first. And it's getting to get to a situation whereby the danger is not just my country first, but my country only. And yet, how can we possibly handle the issue of global warming, the scourge of terrorism, the collapse of financial systems all over the world? How are we going to, and conflicts all over the world, how are we going to do it except by coming together and do it in a framework that we can all recognize and that we can all believe this is ours? And it's also the case that most of the conflicts in the world today are not limited to the countries. The impact is not limited to the country in which it's taking place. It's not as if you can isolate the conflict. Many of the conflicts going around the world today have regional dimension. The neighbors get involved. The regions get involved. The impact becomes global. And so it's very, very important to reestablish that framework of all of us getting together to resolve what have become common problems. And that is what, in a sense, that's what the UN is supposed to be, that countries big and small, rich and poor, powerful and weak, come together to recognize that there's a common humanity, that there's a common framework with which to deal with issues, so that when there's a consensus, then we all feel that, yes, we've been involved in the process of deciding. And I recall, again, as ambassador of Nigeria, when one of my presidents came, this was the early 1990s, talking about new world order. And we put it in his mouth because we ambassadors, our job is to write speeches that our leaders articulate. That, yes, when there's the prospect of a new world order, but a new world order that has to be commonly defined, commonly designed, and commonly implemented. So that's the only thing that can last, because then we feel we are committed to a process of defining who we are, what is the kind of world in which we are living in, and how can we commonly address the challenges faces. Because in the final analysis, what do countries want? What do individuals want? Peace and security. They want a security that is not just political. They want economic security, social security, environmental security. They want their views to be respected. They want their rights to be respected. They want the ability to be able to participate in who governs them and how. And of course, they want to be able to earn a living, so that the issue of peace and security, the issue of respect for human rights, and also the issue of development becomes global goals to which we all should aspire. And I'm delighted also that I'm giving this presentation at a very auspicious time. Next year, United Nations, believe it or not, will be 75 years old. Yeah. And my premise is that if the United Nations did not exist, we'll have had to invent it. But thank God we don't need to invent it. It's already there. It will be 75 years. So this is a time to then reflect what has the United Nations done to promote this common commitment to the values that we all share. How has it fared? What are the things that need to be repaired? And what are the new issues that it needs to address? A few months ago, the Chancellor of Germany visited my country, Nigeria. Not long after that, the British Prime Minister came. And somebody asked me, say, what is it that we are doing in Nigeria that all these people are coming to see us? And I told them, well, don't be deceived. They are not coming because they love Nigeria or Nigerians. But they realize that if they do not come, if they don't work with our leaders, okay, guess what? Some of the things that are happening in Nigeria, some of the things that are happening in West Africa is going to affect them. If the security situation in Nigeria deteriorates further, if the economy goes down, guess what? The young men and women are risking their lives. They are crossing the desert. They are trying to cross the Mediterranean. Many of them drown in the process, looking for opportunities. So in order to address their own challenges that comes from migration and emigration, they have to work with us, not because they love us, but because it's in their interest to do so. And it's also in our own interest to end conflicts and to promote employment for our youths. Let me give you a figure that will amaze you. As I speak, there are 2 million Nigerians that have the right of entry to go into Britain now. Not to seek entry. In other words, not people you can prevent. They already have the right because they hold the British passport. 2 million. So imagine if things fall apart. 2 million Nigerians will have the right of entry to go to Britain. And you recall that Brexit, all these things you had, it's only because 100,000 people from Eastern Europe are entering, free entry into Britain, and the British people feel, no, we can't continue to accept it. Of course, there are a lot more other reasons, but immigration and how to check it is one of the issues. So UN 75 years next year. This is an opportunity, therefore, to come together, and thank God, the President of the United Nations General Assembly has decided that this is very important to have a 75th anniversary celebration that is more than the issuance of pious words, but to sit down together, what is wrong, what needs to be fixed, how do we make this United Nations work for us, work better for all? Because the United Nations, if you look at the preamble, it didn't say we, the governments of the world. No. It said we the peoples of the world, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which in the lifetime of the founding fathers brought untold sorrows to mankind. So it is about we the peoples, of course through our leadership, through our representative, but it's about we the people. And it is therefore set up principally to end wars, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in their lifetime, that is the founding fathers, World War I, World War II, brought so much untold sorrows to mankind. Well, that objective has not been achieved, obviously, but it has not been abandoned. So imagine if it was abandoned, if there was no institution, if there was no framework for us to come together, to end wars, to promote peace, to promote human rights, to promote development, where would we be? So things can get a lot worse unless we, again, come together and say, let's fix what is not working and let's move together as one. Now, what is my own experience? Because I decided that what I'm going to do is not to give you an intellectual or academic exercise. That's what I'm trained for. Columbia is an intellectual setting, but I thought what might be useful is to share with you my own experience, you know, and I've been privileged, or some people might say I've been punished, because I, as Under Secretary General of the UN, guess where I've always been sent to go and make peace? Angola, Cyprus, Myanmar, Darfur. Have I missed some other place? South Africa, to try to help to bring apartheid to an end. In fact, some of my critics at the UN call me Ambassador Ibrahim Gambari, the Special Envoy to world dictators. Because many of these countries are ruled by dictators. And I'm a bit proud of that. You know why? Because I feel somebody has to talk to dictators. Somebody has to talk to nasty people. Because how do you influence them unless you engage them? And I want to share with you an experience. John Bolton, who is now the National Security Advisor to President Trump, he was ambassador to the UN. And I was appointed the first, and one of the things wrong with the UN, by the way, I was the first and only I was the first and only person from the non-Western country to head the Department of Political Affairs. That's one of the great things Kofi Annan did. He appointed me as the head of the Department of Political Affairs, which is at the center of the UN activities. Nobody before me and nobody after me has been given that, because that's believed to be reserved for the big boys, you know, even though this is supposed to be our organization. But anyway, Kofi appointed me, and I went to Lebanon and spoke with the Hezbollah. And I came back to report to the Security Council. And John Bolton said, you see, how can you, we are paid, your salary is paid by us, the member states. How can you go and talk to Hezbollah? Aren't you aware that this is a terrorist organization? And I spoke very calmly that, Mr. Ambassador, the UN, that's precisely why it's set up, because it has to speak to everybody, good and bad. In order, you should challenge the purpose of why we are speaking, not why. And in any case, the enemy of today may become an ally of tomorrow. And I reminded him, and this is the point he did not like, what was true. I said, you know, one of your predecessors, ambassador of the United States, was sacked. Andrew Young. He was dismissed by Jimmy Carter. Guess what? For talking to Yasser Arafat, who was the leader of the PLO. Yasser Arafat became one of the closest allies until he died of the United States in the search for peace. So the enemies of today can become allies tomorrow. But that can only come when you engage with them. So that's one of the lessons that I learned. That, you see, to make peace, you have to be available to all kinds of people who could be your helper or could be spoilers. And it's your job to persuade them to be your ally instead of a spoiler. first lesson. Secondly, that in trying to mediate, you have to establish your credibility and empathy with the parties. Let me talk about Myanmar. The Myanmar, otherwise known as Burma to Americans, has had military rule for over 40 years. And the last election before the recent times they had, Aung San Suu Kyi won the election. But guess what? Instead of handing power to the person who won the election, they locked her up for 18 and a half years. And I was sent to the military leaders, A, to try to get them to release this lady, and B, to move in the direction of democratization, in other words, to hand over power. Very easy task, right? And two things I did. First, nobody has been allowed to see Aung San Suu Kyi before my time. So people even assumed that she had died, and the military was just covering up. So I was on my way to the airport from New Rochelle, where I live, when Kofi Annan called me, he was Secretary General, and said, Ibrahim, I don't think you should proceed on this trip. And I said, why? He said, well, you see, you are the first non-Western head of political affairs. If you go there and you are not allowed to see Aung San Suu Kyi, they will say your mission has failed before you even started. And I don't want my Under-Secretary General for Political Affairs, an African, to be labeled a failure before he even started. So I think you should, and you have no guarantee that the military will allow you to see her. So I told Kofi Annan, I said, Secretary General, you are right. Maybe I may not be allowed to see her. But maybe I'll be allowed to see her. But the best way to guarantee that I will not see her is not to go on this trip. The best way to guarantee that I will not see her is not to go. And there's no way you can bring peace to Myanmar without engaging this lady. So he said, proceed. And guess what? I was allowed to see her for the first time. That anybody was allowed to see for 2.5 years. And I sat with her. But the challenge is to get both herself and the military to engage. And I first talked to the military leader, and she said to me, you know, Aung San Suu Kyi may like you, but she hates us. Well, and I was saying, why wouldn't she hate you? You put her, she won an election, and you put her in jail for 18.5 years. I said, well, why do you want to see her? I said, well, I cannot try to make peace and to promote, to do mediation without engaging her. She's an important player. He said, okay, very reluctantly we'll allow you to see her. But then I said to them, they said to me, if what you are coming to do is to ask us to step aside so that she can take over immediately, you have got a long way to go, and you've got another thing coming. Because we don't want outsiders to tell us how to run our country. Then I told them, I said, you know, I'm sent here as Secretary General Special Representative, you see. But I'm a Nigerian, and we have had problems with the military taking power and not giving it and canceling elections. Maybe I can help you. Maybe I can share with you how Nigeria moved from being a pariah state to a democratically elected system. I'm a president that is democratically elected. I say, however, if you don't want me to continue, no problem. I have 18 other problems that I'm dealing with at the UN. Finally, I told them, I said, I'm not here to replace your own. They have a 7 steps roadmap to democracy. I said, I'm not going to replace that with anything that I brought on my own. But your 7 steps to democracy, the first step has taken 14 years. Now, if we continue at this rate, we'll all be dead by the time we get to. So my job is to help you to accelerate and to make credible. This is your 7th step. So second lesson, you have to have you have to empathize with the parties. You have to know the issue, but not give the impression that you are telling them what to do. You work with what they know, you work with them, and And that's the easiest way in which you can get a hearing. And that is exactly what happened. But of course, to also talk to Aung San Suu Kyi was a problem, because he said, these people tried to kill me. I won the election, they locked me up, they tried to kill me. I don't want to talk to them. I said, well, you have a choice. Either you talk to me, to talk to them and to promote your talking, or you can continue to stay in jail for the next 18 years. And what is that going to do for your own people who want you out, who want you to play a role? So in the end, you gain the confidence of both. But as a mediator, you must also know that you must insist that you are going to be the only mediator, because in a crisis, there are all kinds of people who claim to be experts in mediation, and your job is to make sure you have, otherwise you have the parties shopping around for who is a softer mediator, who it is that they can run rings around. Now, when you, and the rest is history, so you recall that I went to me and my mother 18 times, and saw the two leaders, I mean the military and Aung San Suu Kyi, and the rest is history. She was released from jail. She played a role in her political process, and now almost the unofficial president. She hasn't behaved well afterwards, but that's another matter. It does not stop the fact that the UN played a role to try to prevent a bad situation from getting worse, from enthroning democracy and human rights, and also moving the country forward towards development. Now, Darfur, that's a lot more complicated, because a war has been going on for so long. And this war is a conflict between, they used to paint it as if this is the Arabs killing Africans. It's not true. You have the nomadic people who are mostly Arabs, with the cattle people, looking for water for their cattle. And you have the sedentary people, the farmers, most of whom are non-Arabs, whose land, whose farms, who have been damaged by the movement of the cattle. So, third point, you must, to really resolve crisis, you have to get to the root cause of not the media characterization, but the root cause of the conflict. And I discovered when I was sent to Darfur, and I was head of the United Nations African Union mission in Darfur for 2 years and 7 months. I was there, and so the root cause is about water, not enough water. The one that is available is poorly distributed, poorly maintained, and unevenly distributed. So people are fighting over water. So it's about climate change. It's about unequal distribution of resources. And so if you are going to really end it, you must address the root causes of the conflict. You must find it. You must find it. And the third aspect that is very important is that many of the, and I referred to it earlier, many of the conflicts in the world nowadays, particularly in the third world, they may be local in origin, but they spread quickly. And therefore, UN cannot, from New York, resolve those conflicts by themselves. They have to work with regional organizations in the area. And that is how, in Darfur, for effectiveness, the UN worked with the African Union, the regional organization for the Africans, teamed together to try to end the conflict in Darfur. So address the root cause of the problem, work with the regional organization and regional leaders in order to make progress. At that time that I was head of the place, there were 30,000 personnel, 16,000 troops, soldiers, 6,000 police, and the rest civilians. And we worked together to address the root causes of the problems, to mediate between the contending forces, to work with the regional organizations, and to work with the United Nations that have more resources in order to try to end the suffering in Darfur. At one point, over 300,000 killed, 1.7 million displaced persons in about 19 IDP camps. So again, you have the need to pull all the actors together to work for a common purpose. And a fourth point, that in dealing with conflicts and and promoting human rights and democratization, you have to work with the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations. And the non-governmental organizations, they are indispensable. In fact, without sounding sexist, I always refer to NGOs in conflict situations, and if you are leader of the mission, I refer to them as equivalent to dealing with my wife. Don't tell her. Her sister is here. So it's difficult to live with her, but it's impossible to live without her. And that is the relationship with NGOs, because they are the ones that provide, you see, the non-governmental organizations, they provide relief for internally displaced peoples. See, when there is a conflict, you have all these internally displaced peoples. They're already running away from their governments. Nobody is in charge of them, because if you're a refugee, by the way, if you're a refugee, you have crossed the border, and there are some rules and regulations on how you can be treated. But when you're internally displaced, there's nobody in charge of you. They are running away from government. So it's the NGOs that bring hope and support for you. Rudimentary education for your children, some health facilities. But the problem with the NGOs is that they want you, as a mediator, to take side with the opposition. Because instinctively, they identify with the victims. But you, as the mediator, you have to get everybody involved, including the Nazi government, so that they can behave better to their citizens that are fleeing from them. And there's a third downside of NGO, which is that, you see, they are responsible to their funders. So they have to paint the picture very dark every time. So like when I came, I said, my job is to reduce the numbers of people who are in internally displaced camps so that many can return. How can they return? They have to return to where they live, A, if security is improved. Secondly, if there are rudimentary provision for health and education. And thirdly, the means of livelihood. I said, so we must concentrate on these three. And the more I was able to do that with the help of others, the IDPs were returning to their homes. But the NGOs, they said, no, they are not returning. The situation is getting bad. And I asked them, why are you saying this? So, well, if we don't say that, we are not going to get funded. If we say the situation improved, everything is getting back, people are going back, so we cannot get our funding. So you have the problem that you have to really fight them. As a matter of fact, they used to say, Gambari's figures are fake figures because the refugees are increasing, not even, the IDPs are increasing rather than decreasing. And by the way, it takes me to the next point, which is what I want to do. And Ambassador Otobo is here, who is an expert in peace building, and he headed the peace building office at the UN before he retired, is that you have to, on the face of it, you say, how can we do development work when war is going on? And I say, no, you can't wait till peace breaks out. You have to keep doing things that of reconstruction, rebuilding, while the war is still going on. And those areas of relative peace, they can see the benefits of peace. So it has a demonstration effect on the others to stop fighting. And I recall that when I was talking to some of our colleagues who are in the development arm of the UN, and I said, let us look beyond relief, beyond giving relief to those who are fighting and those who are in IDP camps. You know what they call me? They said Gambari's program is beyond belief. That how can we do peace building while war is going on? And I was convinced that, in fact, the IDPs will not return to their places unless you have development going there, roads, hospitals, health services, and means of livelihood. In any case, and this also touches the issue of dealing with terrorists and terrorism. There's nothing terrorists and this armed movement hate. You know what they hate the most? Signs of normality. And that is what development provides. When children are going to school, when they see that there's hospital and clinics, and when they see people gathering to discuss the future of the country, they hate it. And so, and precisely, you must do what they hate in order to defeat terrorism. So let me, in the few minutes left, let me just go very quickly on some of the major recommendations that, from my experience in peacemaking, peace building, mediation. Incidentally, before I go into that, I will also mention that something that surprised me was that when I was made the head of the Department of Political Affairs, that was when I set up the mediation support unit for the United Nations. Can you imagine that the whole United Nations, which is about making peace, promoting democracy, human rights, has no mediation capacity at all, no office. So I set it up. Because before this office was set up, when you are appointed by the Secretary General as a big title, Special Envoy of the Secretary General to Cyprus, to Myanmar, to Angola, you go to meet the Secretary General, he shakes your hands, and he says, Mr. Gambari, congratulations, and good luck to you. Where is the support? I mean, where you are sending me, what are the issues? Who are the key players? Who are the spoilers? What are the instruments that are going to be in my hands? What are the priorities? There's no support office to help the mediator. You are pretty much on your own. And if you fail, the Secretary General will sack you. And if he fails, he's blamed by the big boys. But if you succeed, by the way, the success is always taken by the Secretary General as the Special Envoy and the big boys. And I learned that also very, very quickly when I was also doing Cyprus. I brought the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots together for the first time. They hadn't met for over some years. And I brought them together. And I said we should sign a set of principles, non-binding, but to guide us, a federal system, bicultural, bilingual, zonal communities coming together for Cyprus. And we're about to sign. And then I said, no, just stop there. They said, why do we stop? I said, let's take a break. So I took a break, called the Secretary General of the UN, and I said, there's a bit of technical things here, and I need for you to talk to the leader of the Greek Cypriot and the leader of the Turkish Cypriots. He did. And we came back together. So the leader of the Greek Cypriot, who hated the idea of the Secretary General talking to the leader of the Turkish Cypriot, who is not recognized by anybody, said, Mr. Gambari, why did you have to do that? I said, no. He said, we're about to do this without his intervention. I said, no, I've learned something. In order to be effective, you must give the boss the credit. So I called Kofi Annan, they signed, and I said, you see, Secretary General, you are the one who succeeded. That's also one way in which you can get interesting assignment to you do the work and give the credit to the boss. And by the way, that's how also the Secretary General of the UN, more fundamentally, he does the work, heavy lifting, but always he has to give the credit to the Security Council and to the big boys, because then they let the pressure off him. So to come to some conclusion then, I've made the following recommendations, that in advancing the cause of peace, in doing mediation, you have to strike a balance between peace and justice, because you have to bring closure to conflict. They have to see, the parties have to see closure. So, for example, we had Charles Taylor, who was a terrible man, brought a lot of suffering to his own people, president of Liberia. But the emphasis and the push by the African Union, by ECOWAS, the West African region, is to say, listen, yes, we're not going to forget the crimes against humanity, war crimes that this man has committed, but let's make peace the priority at this time. Let's support him. And he became president. And people are saying, how could you support this man to be president who has committed so much atrocities? He should be in jail. He said, yes, but you have to sequence that. First, give him the presidency, encourage him to stop the war, because he has the troops, and then you go after him and get him accountable, because some of the crimes he has committed have no expiration date. Crime against humanity has no expiration date. And guess what? The international community succeeded, A, in bringing peace to Liberia by installing him and taking him out and getting him to the Hague. I think he's been convicted now, hasn't he? He's serving terms. But if you say, no, we must go for justice, by all means, at once, now, you will get neither peace nor justice. But there will be no durable peace without justice either. So it has to be a question of balance. Secondly, I think it's important for mediators not just to be content with signing agreements. It's easy to sign agreement. Many of the parties will willing to sign, but how do you implement the agreement? So you must build the implementation mechanism to agreement, and that's where the stick and the carrots are. The interesting thing, though, is that I have found the big boys, they will only encourage you to use the stick. They never give you the carrots. They keep the carrots in their pocket, but they expect you to use only the sticks. But you must insist on a stick and carrot approach in order to be part of an implementation mechanism to bring war to an end. Thirdly, we have to ensure strong women participation in conflict resolution. I'm not saying this because of the ladies in the room and because of my wife, who is a real boss in my house, but because when war begins and conflict, who suffers the most is the women, because they have to try to look after the family in spite of the conflicts and the tragedies. So how come the biggest victims of war are not involved in making peace? They have the incentive to make the peace more than the men. And the women in West Africa, by the way, the Mano River Union, one time they decided, we have had enough with these men, that we are going to, they were on strike. They will not cook food for their husband and perform other roles that wives do until they stop the war. And guess what? When they were on strike, the war stopped. So why don't we get them involved? Because the UN is very lousy. As I speak, the number of women who are special envoys, the number of women who are head of peacekeeping operations, they're extremely few. There's a lip service, there's the Security Council resolution saying there should be more women, but it's not been implemented. And I think those who suffer the most from conflict should be at the forefront of making peace. It's very, very important. I've mentioned the issue of how to manage spoilers, because there have been spoilers. There are some people that they just don't want peace because it's not in their interest to do so. Because when there's a conflict, guess what? All these freedom fighters, they get invited to conferences in New York and business class. They put them in fancy hotels. Incidentally, only Nigeria knew how to manage spoilers. There was a conference on Darfur that Nigeria hosted, and they found out that the parties to the conflict in Sudan, they were prolonging this. And then it was found out, why are they prolonging this? Because they were staying in 5-star hotels in Abuja. And then they moved them to a tent. And within 2 weeks, they signed a peace agreement. Now, unfortunately, the Qatar now took over the mediation in Darfur. And I recommended to them, I said, the experience of Nigeria is, because I was also chief mediator for Darfur, I said, all these people, put them in a 1-star hotel. Problem is there's no 1-star hotel in Qatar. Qatar. So really, you have to manage spoilers. You have to isolate them. You have to reduce all the incentive for them to continue. And if everything fails, then you have to apply sanctions. The problem with applying sanctions, that if the Americans and the West have applied sanctions to the so-called leaders of the armed movement in Darfur, the war will have ended sooner. But for political reasons, they wanted to bring down Bashir. So by supporting the armed movement. And I told them, nothing will bring Bashir down except the people, when they organize to bring him down. Not by supporting the armed movement, not even by helping to break up his country. These are misplaced policies and priorities. They didn't listen to me. But in the end, Bashir has been brought down. Guess whom? It's just by his own army, who concluded that they can't continue to kill the children of professionals in the country and who continue to, up till now, they are still demonstrating. So let me now come to a final point, which is this, that I have found in all my experiences, South Africa, Angola, Myanmar, Cyprus, Darfur, Iraq, there can be no military solutions to conflicts. Because if there could have been a military solution, there should have been. So if there can be no military solution to conflict, that's the more reason why we need those who are skilled at mediation. That is why we need the Security Council of the UN that works to promote peaceful resolution of conflict. That is why we need the regional organization. That's why we need the UN to work together to promote a peaceful resolution of conflict. And in any case, for me, well, somebody might say, okay, in Angola, and Ambassador Omarege is here, you can say maybe there was a military solution because the major culprit was Savimbi, and the MPLA government, they tracked him down, killed him, and the war was over. That may be so, but that may be the exception that proves the rule. In most cases, there can be no military solution to conflict, and therefore, the role of the UN, what it was set up for, the role of the Secretary General's good offices and special envoys and regional organizations become extremely important. I want to end by drawing attention to two things. First, that the preamble of the UN says, we the peoples. Therefore, the issue of peace and conflict resolution, the issue of democratization, the issue of human rights is about we the people. We mustn't, all these are too important to leave to governments alone. Therefore, NGOs, civil societies, think tanks, intellectual communities, groups like yours have to be involved to put pressure on our governments to make peaceful resolution of conflict, ending wars, ending terrorism, a priority of their actions at the United Nations. And I think it's the UNESCO motto that says, war begins in the hearts of men, and it is to the hearts of men and women that the defense of peace must be constructed. So it's about education at the local level, at the national level, political education, not in terms of partisan politics, but to establish priorities, human priorities, common commitment to resolve common goals. And finally, I want to suggest that now that UN is going to be 75 years old, this is a good opportunity to really influence all our governments and put all efforts together to ensure that we utilize this 75th anniversary to really make changes that needs to be made to the UN, including reform of the Security Council, the veto power used by, or misused by the permanent members, to put peace and justice together, to put peace building at the forefront of peacekeeping, for countries to spend more money. If you know, the budgets of UN peacekeeping is about 3 or 4 times the regular budgets of the UN. Countries are more prepared to spend money for firefighting, for peacekeeping, than for prevention and for peace building. That priority has to be changed, and it is my own sincere hope that we'll be able to make this anniversary an opportunity to correct what is wrong, to make multilateralism attractive to all and acceptable to all, and for the United Nations that really works for we, the peoples. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a very inspirational talk. But the main question I have is, I think in everybody's mind now, how do you handle terrorism by so-called religious groups, the ISIS, for example? Okay. Who do you talk to? How do you get them to stop? Okay. This is it's been happening, of course, most recently.
Okay. It's good. I'll take a few and then respond to them. don't tell me it's so clear everything I've said that there are no. Feel free to disagree.
I'm just going to,
Yeah.
I'll make the question, then we'll give it to James.
Okay.
How do you have people in the United States, which of course is a major funder of the UN, understand more of the realities of multilateralism, because we're such a huge power compared to other places?
Okay.
My question is this, a lot of conflicts never end. It just seems like the UN gets in there or other groups, and 20 years later they're still there and nothing ends. How do you change things to get the conflicts to end so that people can move on?
Good. Let me respond to these three because they are really fundamental questions and issues. Let me take the last one first. First, as long as the world exists, there will always be conflict. But what we should be worried about more is violent conflicts. Because conflicts that are not violent are conflicts that are managed. There are conflicts in the family. There are conflicts in community. But they don't all have to lead to violent conflicts that brings death and destruction to the communities and to the peoples. So, but violence conflicts now, how do we end them? Take the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. One of our leaders, President Obasanjo, he was a lieutenant in the Nigerian army sent to the Congo to make peace in 1960. 2005, he was sent there by the same United Nations to try to make peace as a special envoy. And that illustrates the point that Professor Fedele is like this conflict never seemed to end. But there are two responses I have. First, there are some conflicts that have ended, okay? And we must then find out what is responsible for the end of those conflicts. Angola, Mozambique in Africa, South Africa to some extent, Namibia. The conflicts have ended. So, and in my view, why they have ended is that somehow the root causes of those conflicts have been addressed. You see, the issue of justice has been addressed. The issue of peace building has been addressed. It's the only way to end those conflicts are to address the real cause of the. And many times, I've mentioned the case of Darfur. It's about water, not enough access to water. But there's also a related issue of power sharing, okay, wealth sharing and power sharing. Unless the best way to lose power, in my view, as a political scientist, is not to share power. If you refuse to share power, ultimately you are going to lose power. So the best way to end conflict is to find out how the power can be shared by the contending forces, how wealth can be shared, how power can be decentralized. That is the best way in which you can bring conflicts to end. And that also points to a question that you did not ask, but flows from it, which is that shouldn't we be spending more resources on conflict prevention? Right? You know, shouldn't we be? And the United Nations is not at all good at prevention. I can talk like this now. I've retired from the UN 12 years. 12 years ago, but I learned that we are very bad at prevention. Why? Because member states are prepared to spend more money on peacekeeping than on prevention. Also, prevention is tougher. You have to go to, okay, what are the root causes of things that may lead to conflict, violent conflicts? How about rebuilding the institutions or building the institutions of justice, of accountability, of transparency? Those things take time, and they take time, and the UN has very little patience because we are so busy responding to firefighting. So we must do more prevention. We must look at the root causes of conflict, and we must also identify best practices where approaches have worked. What is responsible? But I must say too that sometimes it's not always easy to demonstrate the conflicts you have managed to prevent. For example, Bakassi, this is a conflict, a potential conflict between Cameroon and Nigeria over this territory called Bakassi. The Secretary General of the UN, then Kofi Annan, very wisely called the two leaders of the countries together, the leader of Cameroon, and said, look, you have taken your case to the International Court of Justice to arbitrate. I want you to sign a pledge that you will respect the outcome of the court, the so-called Green Tree Agreement. So I will respect the outcome. And because each of them believed they will win the case in the Supreme, they quickly signed that they will respect the outcome. Because Nigeria believes it has such a strong case they are going to win. Cameroon believed the same. It got them together, they signed. And when Cameroon won, well, Nigeria had very little option but to honor their own commitment in writing. So in that way, conflict has been prevented. I think there was also a conflict between, Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, I think. Again, the UN comes in and try to identify the root causes, try to see some formula that will work. But you are right that, yes, there are some conflict that seem never to end. But so our task is to prevent other conflicts joining those and to also go to the root of the causes and to do prevention and peace building. The second, in the reverse of that, the reality of multilateralism. How do you explain that to people in the Middle West, for example? And I'll tell you a true story. Madeleine Albright, who became Secretary of State, as you know, was our colleague at the UN. He was ambassador to UN and happened to be there at the same time as I was in the Security Council. And she came back from a trip to the Middle West because he's decided that the best way is to go to town halls in many parts of the United States and explain the value of the UN and the value of multilateralism. So she came back and told us, she gave a talk somewhere, I think Minnesota, and everything was going well. And at the end, the people said, yeah, well, before you spoke, Madam Ambassador, we didn't really know what is the value of this UN to the U.S. taxpayers, blah, blah, blah. But I think you seem to have shown us that on our own, we cannot resolve many of these problems in the world, including terrorism, that the money we also spend in the Pentagon and the money we spend in the UN is a very tiny proportion of the billions we spend in the Pentagon. So our taxpayer money is actually more cost-effective supporting the UN than just pouring money into all these, what we spend in Pentagon. But she said she was very happy when this was happening until the person then said, but the problem is, how come that UN, how come there are so many foreigners there? So, and she said, she told them, well, that cannot be helped. Unfortunately, that cannot be helped. Everything else can be helped, but the fact that there are so many foreigners. But in fact, it is not true. The U.S. Is the dominant power at the UN. First, yes, you pay most of the budget, but the amount of money that is spent in New York by other countries in maintaining the embassies is not small. Ask the mayors of New York, That's number one. Ask them. The second is what I mentioned, cost effectiveness of the money that is spent. Thirdly, it's in many ways your organization. That's why it's very curious when Americans condemn the UN. It's your organization. First, you host it. Nobody can be Secretary General of the UN if he does not at least listen to what you have to say. And the Secretary General that tried to disagree strongly with the UN, you know what happened to him? He didn't get a second term. So, and you have the veto power. What veto means, nothing can happen there seriously against your interests. You have the power to veto. So it's like, for the rest of the people, well, what more do you want? You control this organization. You control who becomes the Secretary General. You have the veto. You have billions of dollars being spent, by countries small and poor, even including like my own country. But you are right. There's still a lot more to be said to try to show how the U.S. is getting even more value for the money that they are spending, which is a fraction of what they are spending on defense. And that the nature of threat to peace and security nowadays is no longer the armies facing one another, Most of the conflicts in the world are within states, but the effect is no longer limited to those countries. And that's the point I was making to you, that what happens in Nigeria about unemployed youths that can be recruited to do terrorist acts, and people for migration, it's going to be felt in Europe. It's already been felt. So it is in their best interest to support the UN and multilateral organizations that address matters to the satisfaction of all. And the third question that you've raised is about terrorism, which is actually a very, very important point. And here's my take on terrorism. We have to find out what is it that makes people to become suicide bombers. Indoctrination, hate speech, hate campaigns. What is it? What is the nature of the environment that encourages terrorism? Let me talk from what I know closely. My own country, Nigeria. We had Boko Haram. You must have heard about Boko Haram. You know what Boko Haram is? Means the local language is Boko Haram. Western education is haram, is useless, is forbidden. You know why the people use that as a slogan to recruit young? They say, okay, you've gone to Western education, you got all your degrees in university, 5 years you cannot get a job. Is that of value? So those who are seeking to recruit, bad people are to recruit, they play on this to say, and it started as a local grievance. They want employment opportunities. They want to be able to speak their mind freely. They want to elect the people of their choice. They want their local governments to work. Started as, then it was not addressed. Then it became big. Then you have the network, and this is the second thing about terrorism. It's no longer localized, you know. You now have Al-Qaeda. You even have Al-Qaeda. Then you have ISS. Then you have Al-Qaeda Sahel in the northern western part of Africa. So all this network. So in order to end it, first you have to really have good governance. You have to have spaces that are also governed. There are some parts of the Sahel where there's no government of any kind. That encourages free movement of arms, free movements of terrorists, you know, because they are ungoverned space. There's no government. Government are broken down. So you have to recreate those governments. You have to rebuild broken societies. And you have to address local grievances before they get out of hand, before they join the networks. And I just read in New York Times 2 days ago, guess where ISS is going now? They are going to Congo. I was shocked. Why would they go to Congo? Because they found spaces there that are ungoverned. They are soft spots. But above all, and this is the point I want to make very strongly, youth unemployment is no longer a developmental issue because you are losing your human capital, but it's also a security issue because then you are creating a pool for millions of young people to be recruited by bad people to do very bad things. So terrorism has to be at the local level, at the national level, at the regional level, and at the UN level, because without the cooperation of all and without addressing some of the core issues, I'm afraid things will just get worse. Thank you very much.
It's inspiring to see you with such a positive effort, everything you've seen and done in the world to still be such a positive human being is a very inspirational thing to me personally. I think that it's time for those of us who are joining at luncheon, we should retire to the fourth floor to the faculty, and there are tables reserved for us up there. And thank you for spending the time with us.